Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. One of the, I guess, common themes here at my my channel here at YouTube and also on my blog is the rather spectacular lack of success of formal language instruction in schools. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on instructing kids in languages at school. And certainly here in Canada, English-speaking school children, very few of them end up being able to speak French, although they all have to take French. In a previous video, I talked about the experience in Japan where kids spend, I don't know how many hours on English, and they don't learn very well. Those that learn well are the ones that are motivated and learn on their own. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that the biggest problem, the biggest reason why, if we had to find one reason why kids have a tough time with language learning at school, I would say it's because of the tests. And I include in tests all kinds of exercises, tests, wherever the teacher tries to test the knowledge of the learner. You know, those kids that have their first experience with acquiring another language or learning another language outside the school system, either from their mother, if say the mother speaks a different language from the father, or because they moved to a different country, those kids learn very well and they end up very often speaking another language. Whereas the ones that encounter the language in a school setting, they end up not speaking very well at all. And you know, I looked at some of the comments I had in Japan about the kinds of things they do in class where they decode texts, and of course I had a comment from one of my viewers who is a teacher in Japan who explained that they have to do such things as write out the same word 400 times, but all because they're trying to learn these words for a specific test. So everything is geared around the test. So they make the kids do things that are ridiculous, like writing words out 400 times, specifically for the test. And I look at my my granddaughter who had to recite a poem. Now there again, it's not for a test, but it was a poem that she wasn't interested in. It wasn't a very interesting poem. She was there trying to memorize it so that the next day she could repeat it in class. In other words, the teacher is looking for some demonstration that the kids have learned. And then we contrast that with the example I gave of the teacher in Algeria who had his students learn the words of popular songs like the Beatles. And I've heard that kind of thing before. I was, again, at this French language meetup. There was another lady there, Vancouver, Anglophone, who spoke French very well, and I asked her why she did so well, and she said, well, we had so-and-so as a teacher in such and such a school, and everybody knows that whoever had so-and-so, they all learned to speak French well. Well, I said, what did she do? Well, she got us interested in the, Félix Leclerc and some of the well-known singers from Quebec. Now, that may not be everybody's taste, but she managed to make that interesting. So she made it interesting for her students. So, I get back this thing. There are so many tools available today. If we forget about testing the kids, if the objective is like, how do we make it fun? How do we make sure that they spend time with the language? And some will do better, and some will do worse. We just have to find something that turns the crank. And I've mentioned this before when I described how I would run a classroom. I would let them read in class. I would let them read, and I would give them, everyone. I really have to say, I think the iPod, and maybe there's other brand names that are just as good, but the iPod Touch is just an amazing tool. It's an amazing tool because you can put so much in the way of learning resources, dictionaries, texts, flashcard system, you name it, into this little device, and we're only just beginning. And if this costs $200, every kid should get one, because it costs the school system something like $7,000 to put each kid through school per year. So buying them one of these things, if they don't already have them, is a relatively small amount of money compared to the amount that is wasted largely through this school system with all the excessive bureaucracy and meetings and professional days for the teachers and all the rest of it. And I would have them read in class. And I've been reading now, myself, I've been reading in Italian, using the dictionary that I have on my iPod Touch. And then I collect all, and of course it collects in a list. And then I take that list of words and I punch it all into Link, so that as I load up more content on Link, all of these words are already in my database, highlighted in yellow and so forth and so on. It's delightful. And it's fun to do. It's fun to sit there and look things up in the dictionary. So I would have them doing that. I would expose them to things of interest. I mean, obviously you'd have to mix up some freedom of choice for them to listen to things that they want to do, and some things you'd have to do in common, so that in class you could talk about it. I would have them, as I've said before, I would have the kids select their favorite words and phrases from their listening and reading, and maybe talk about them in class initially in their own language, and eventually, if some are ready for it, to talk in the target language. But it doesn't have to be that. I think it should just be a matter of getting them, somehow hoping to get them turned on to the language. Because there's one thing that's for sure, and that is that the present system, with the emphasis on testing, and testing trying to prove that they've learned what we taught them, and doing that year after year, when we see that in the end the result is that very few of them can speak the language, at least in the case of English Canada and in Japan, only the very motivated learn. I think the situation is different in certain countries in Europe, not in Southern Europe, to judge from my discussions with Albert in Barcelona and with Adalberto in Italy. The situation there is the same as in Canada and Japan. Now in Sweden, the situation is different, but I think that has nothing to do with the amount of testing they do at school, and has everything to do with the fact that so many television programs are available in English, and the kids there are exposed to English-speaking culture, whether from England or from the United States, as early, in their childhood, and they're exposed to English-speaking pop culture and whatever it might be. So the message here is, the more I think of it, I am just convinced that it's tests, this desire. It's not as, let's face it, language learning in ours, if I take the case of English-speaking Canadians, we basically assume the kids are not going to learn to speak French. I mean, let's get serious. For the last, I'm 64. For at least 50 years, nobody learns French at school. So that it's basically a given that they're not going to learn through this process. So I think we can afford to experiment a little. And having seen the results of the Japanese English-speaking instruction program, I think there should be some room for experimentation, because what's happening right now doesn't work. It's not doing the job. I mean, that's a given. I think learning these languages almost becomes like a luxury. It's something that's on the program, and we kind of have to do it, but nobody really expects anybody to learn. We do expect people to learn how to add and subtract. We do expect people to learn how to read and write. Obviously, people who want to study science and so forth, they have to learn certain, the foundations of those disciplines in math and physics. But in language, that doesn't matter. The foundations don't matter. You can learn certain vocabulary or certain basic structures later. I don't believe that language is a matter of creating a foundation and building on that foundation. I'm totally convinced that that's not the case at all. It's more like a crossword puzzle that as you put more pieces in there, it starts to become clearer gradually, and you don't know at what point certain things are going to become clear. And it's only through this exposure. So if we can somehow interest kids in the language and let them just acquire words and familiarity with the language, they can't do worse than what's happening right now. As I say, I think we should get rid of tests in the school system insofar as language instruction is concerned. Gone, none, period. I think we'll get better results. Okay, thanks for listening.